Arthur Fleck, a party clown, gets ready for work. He looks at himself in the mirror and forces a smile, pulling the corners of his mouth up and down as a single tear rolls down his cheek. Out on the street, he dances while holding a sign promoting the store that hired him. Suddenly, a group of kids snatch the sign and run away. Arthur chases them into an alley, but instead of getting the sign back, the kids knock him down and beat him up brutally. After a rough day, Arthur goes to his therapy session. Between uncontrollable bursts of laughter, he tells his therapist how bad things are getting out there. She nods. The city is tense. People are angry. The therapist asks him about his notebook and Arthur hands it over, explaining that he also uses it to write jokes because he wants to be a comedian. She flips through the pages and finds some unsettling lines. "I just hope my death makes more sense than my life." She asks how he feels about coming to therapy, and Arthur replies that he felt better when he was in the hospital. Then he asks if she can increase his medication dosage, but she reminds him he's already on 7 meds. He just wants to stop feeling this way. The session ends and Arthur gets on a bus where he tries to make a kid laugh, but the boy's mom gets upset and tells him to stop. Arthur starts laughing uncontrollably, making the woman even more uncomfortable. To apologize, he hands her a card explaining that his laughter is caused by a neurological condition. The condition Arthur describes actually exists in real life, pseudobulbar affect or PBA. PBA is a neurological disorder that causes sudden, uncontrollable episodes of laughter or crying with the person having no control over it. What's most confusing is that these outbursts don't necessarily reflect what the person is actually feeling at the time. It's important to note that PBA isn't a psychological disorder, it's neurological. It's not an emotional problem, but a dysfunction in the brain's communication between the regions that regulate emotion and those that control expression. Normally, these areas work in sync, but for someone with PBA, the expressive part can activate on its own, triggering laughter or tears for no apparent reason. This means someone with the condition might burst out laughing at a funeral or cry during a funny moment. Sadly, this often leads to social isolation as people around them don't understand what's happening. Their daily life becomes incredibly difficult because they never know when an episode might occur and put them in an uncomfortable or even dangerous situation. Pseudobulbar affect typically appears after brain damage, which can be caused by a stroke, tumor, or traumatic brain injury. In Arthur's case, we later get hints about what might have caused it. I appreciate that the filmmakers included this disorder in his character. It adds a realistic layer and reinforces his isolation. It makes his story even more tragic. He's not just rejected for who he is, his own body repeatedly betrays him, exposing him to ridicule and cruelty. Arthur returns to his apartment building, which is in terrible shape. He checks the mailbox and heads upstairs to the apartment he shares with his sick mother, Penny. She asks if any letters arrived, but he says no. Penny has been writing letters to her former boss, Thomas Wayne, hoping he'll respond someday. While watching TV together, the Murray Franklin show comes on. Arthur imagines himself sitting in the audience until Murray notices him and invites him on stage. In his fantasy, Arthur stands and says he lives with his mother and takes care of her, which draws laughs from the crowd. But Murray hushes them and tells them he also lived alone with his mom before he got famous after his father walked out. Arthur, moved, says he understands what that's like. He's always been the man of the house and has looked after his mother. In his mind, the crowd applauds. Arthur says his mother loves him very much and always reminds him to smile and put on a happy face because his purpose in life is to bring joy to others. Murray tells him he likes his attitude and invites him on stage. Arthur walks through the cheering crowd and joins Murray, who tells him he would trade all his success just to have a son like Arthur. Then they hug. Suddenly, Arthur snaps back to reality and smiles. With everything we've seen of Arthur so far, and now this fantasy, we can begin to analyze him psychologically. Arthur is a completely isolated man with severe mental health issues and no one in his life besides his mother, who also seems to have her own psychological problems. He's rejected and socially isolated, and his psychological and neurological condition only deepens that isolation. His only option for help is the public healthcare system, which doesn't seem to provide quality care or genuinely care about people like him. He's on 7 medications, but still doesn't feel any better. And it makes sense when you consider the environment he's stuck in. His suffering doesn't just come from within, it's reinforced by the world around him. He's alone, without support, and people reject him for his strange behavior. If the external conditions that reinforce his pain never change, it's nearly impossible for Arthur to get better. No matter how many pills he takes, if the world keeps ridiculing and humiliating him, he'll never stop feeling like this. Once we understand that, his fantasy makes even more sense. Arthur is someone who's been rejected his entire life. He craves validation. He wants to be seen. His mother constantly tells him his purpose is to make people laugh and bring joy into the world. And he's clung to that idea because it's it's the only thing that gives his life meaning. That's why he idolizes Murray and relates to him. In his fantasy, Arthur and Murray share similar stories. Murray says he lived alone with his mom before becoming famous, but that's probably not true. It's Arthur projecting himself onto him. Murray represents everything Arthur longs for: to make people laugh, to be loved, to be recognized and validated. He wants to be seen and accepted, to feel like he belongs. He believes that by following in Murray's footsteps, he can achieve that. But as the movie will show us, no matter how hard he tries, reality is much harsher and harder to change. The next day at work, Arthur's co-worker Randall hears about the beating and gives him a gun for protection. Later, the boss calls Arthur into his office, saying some clients complained that he vanished and never returned the sign. Arthur tries to explain that he was assaulted, but his boss doesn't believe him and says the cost of the sign will be docked from his pay. Frustrated, Arthur walks out and kicks a trash can to vent his anger. Later, in the elevator of his building, Arthur shares a moment with his neighbor Sophie. They exchange glances and smile at each other. Back in his apartment, Arthur bathes his mother, who once again asks if any letter from Thomas Wayne has arrived. Arthur asks what she expects from him, and she says she hopes he'll help them. But Arthur tries to reassure her, telling her not to worry about money. His comedy show is going to be a hit. The next day, Arthur follows Sophie around the city. Later, he attends a stand-up comedy show to take notes, which he continues developing once he's home. It's clear he writes with his right hand, but then something changes. He straightens up and begins writing with his other hand. It's like there's something inside him just waiting to come out. He smiles and writes. The worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. It's worth pausing here to reflect on Arthur's line because it captures something deeply real. Mental illness is often invisible, and that leads many people to downplay or even ignore it. Instead of support, empathy, or understanding, those who suffer are often met with unrealistic expectations. They're expected to act normal, to control their emotions and carry on as if nothing's wrong, without any consideration for how hard that actually is. The problem with this mindset is that mental illness doesn't come solely from biological or chemical causes. It's also shaped by social factors. And that's crucial, because the environment someone lives in, the support or lack of it they receive both personally and professionally, can make their struggle either more bearable or much harder. That's where society plays a major role. But as Arthur's line suggests, we live in a world that still holds many biases around mental disorders. Part of that is due to misinformation, but also because mental illness isn't visible like a broken bone or an open wound, people don't take it seriously. Some even believe that with enough positive thinking or willpower, someone can get over it. On top of that, access to quality mental health care remains difficult for many, whether because of lack of resources or because the healthcare system simply isn't accessible. Mental health isn't just an individual issue, it's a social one. It's not enough for someone to try their best to get better if the world around them doesn't give them the conditions to heal. And while we can't change the system overnight, we can choose to be more compassionate, empathetic, and understanding. Even if it doesn't seem like much, that can make a huge difference for someone who's hurting inside. Sophie shows up at Arthur's door and asks if he's been following her. Arthur says yes, they joke about it, and he manages to make her laugh. Sophie tells him, "You're funny, Arthur," though it's odd she uses his name. He never actually told it to her. Still, Arthur decides to invite her to his upcoming comedy show. The next day, Arthur works as a clown entertaining kids at a hospital. But during his act, his gun falls to the floor in front of everyone. His boss finds out and is furious. Arthur tries to convince him that the gun was just a prop, but the boss doesn't believe him, especially since Randall claimed Arthur tried to buy a gun from him the week before. In the end, he gets fired. Frustrated, Arthur takes the subway home. In the same car, 3 men are harassing a woman. Suddenly, Arthur starts laughing uncontrollably, drawing attention to himself. The men offended turn their aggression toward him. Arthur tries to explain, but they beat him up. Sick of everyone's cruelty, he pulls out his gun and kills them. Realizing what he's just done, he panics and flees, eventually hiding in a public restroom. There, the anxiety slowly fades and something inside him shifts. He starts to dance. That other part of him has emerged once again. Moments later, Arthur returns to his building and with a new sense of confidence knocks on Sophie's door. When she opens, Arthur kisses her, and they spend the night together. The next morning, Arthur returns to pick up his things and hears his co-workers talking about the clown who shot 3 men. Some express sympathy, even Randall, whose hypocrisy irritates Arthur. Fed up, he tells them the gun used in the crime belonged to Randall. Arthur heads home, takes his last dose of medication, and sits with his mother to watch the news. On TV, Thomas Wayne is giving a statement about the 3 men who were killed. They were employees at his company. Wayne calls them educated and respectable men. When asked about the growing resentment toward the wealthy, Wayne says he's planning to run for mayor to address it. But when asked about the killer, he calls him a coward for hiding behind a mask and essentially refers to the less privileged as clowns, implying they don't contribute anything to society. His words spark outrage among many, and in response, people begin using the image of the clown as a symbol of protest. Days later, Arthur returns to see his therapist. He accuses her of never listening to him. He says that for the first time he feels like he exists, that people are starting to notice him, but she just tells him the government has cut funding and this will be his last session, meaning he'll no longer receive his meds. She adds that the government doesn't care about people like him or people like her. There's something painfully ironic about all this. The government decided to cut mental health services, showing just how low a priority people with severe disorders really are. But when someone commits a crime, suddenly mental illness becomes relevant. People talk about the attacker's condition and try to explain it from that angle. This isn't about justifying what Arthur does, but understanding the circumstances that can push someone to the edge. It's not always just about personal responsibility when the world crushes someone and leaves them with few options. Arthur is a reflection of a broken system, one that abandons those who need help the most and then mocks them, calling them clowns who don't do anything with their lives. If access to mental health care were easier, if there were more support and less indifference, maybe fewer people would slip through the cracks. But as long as things stay the way they are, as long as the system abandons the vulnerable and then feigns shock when one of them snaps, there will always be more stories like Arthur's. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but when that child is rejected by his village, he'll grow up to burn it down just to feel its warmth. That night, Arthur performs at a comedy club. Sophie is in the audience. When he takes the stage, he starts laughing uncontrollably. When he finally gets a few jokes out, no one laughs. Back at home, Arthur finds a new letter his mother wrote, where she claims that he is the son of Thomas Wayne. Arthur immediately confronts her, and Penny tells him that she and Wayne were in love but had to keep up appearances. The next day, Arthur goes to Wayne Manor and meets a young Bruce, who, for those who don't know, will grow up to become Batman. Arthur performs a few magic tricks for him, but Alfred shows up and tells him to leave, threatening to call the police. Arthur insists that he's Penny's son and wants to see Mr. Wayne because he knows the truth, but Alfred laughs and tells him his mother was delusional. When Arthur returns home, he finds that his mother has suffered a stroke and is being rushed to the hospital. Without hesitation, he gets in the ambulance with her. At the hospital, two detectives approach him to question him about the subway killings. His former boss had told them about the gun incident at the children's hospital. While smoking with his right hand, Arthur tells them it was just a prop and returns to his mother's side. In the hospital room, he turns on the Murray Franklin show, but what he sees devastates him. The host plays clips from Arthur's stand-up act, mocking him and calling him a joker. Back at his apartment, Arthur sees news coverage of protesters wearing clown masks gathering outside a theater where Thomas Wayne is speaking. He decides to go and manages to sneak into the building. In the bathroom, he comes face to face with Wayne and tells him that Penny is his mother. Thomas responds by saying that Penny was mentally ill, that she had been institutionalized at Arkham, and that Arthur was actually adopted. Arthur, frustrated, begins to laugh uncontrollably. Wayne, irritated by the laughter, punches him and walks away. Amid all the blows that have shattered Arthur's already fragile life, the subway killings, the constant mockery and humiliation, the betrayal by his idol Murray, there was one last flicker of hope. The possibility that Thomas Wayne might be his father. That represented a chance to finally find the love and protection he's always longed for amid the chaos. But reality hit hard. Wayne humiliated him and crushed the illusion of having a father, and Arthur discovered something even worse. The one person who had always been in his life, his mother, might not even be his real mother. His entire life began to feel like a lie, but the final blow was yet to come. The next day, Arthur receives a call from Murray Franklin's team inviting him to appear on the show. He accepts. Later, he takes a bus to Arkham Hospital and looks up his mother's file. He confirms she had a psychotic disorder and that he was adopted. But he finds something even more disturbing. Documents revealing that Penny allowed her boyfriend to abuse him. In one report, Arthur was found tied to a radiator in their apartment, malnourished, with multiple bruises and a serious head injury. This is Arthur's breaking point. This revelation strips away the only pillar he had left. For his entire life, his mother had been his only source of affection and validation. But now, all of that collapses. Arthur had been standing at the edge of the abyss, but this was the final push. It's the complete breakdown of his identity. If his mother isn't really his mother and was complicit in his abuse, then his whole story is a lie. Who is he really? He's not a Fleck and he's not a Wayne. He is no one. A shadow in the system. Everything that tethered him to reality has crumbled, and in this moment of utter vulnerability, that that other part of him, the one that's been surfacing slowly, is finally ready to take over. On top of this, with the revelation of the severe head trauma he suffered, we can infer that this might be the cause of Arthur's pseudo-bulbar affect, which adds yet another tragic layer to his story. Each episode of uncontrollable laughter is a cruel reminder of the abuse he endured in childhood. Shocked by what he's just read, Arthur returns home and walks into Sophie's apartment unannounced. When she sees him, she panics and asks him to leave. It becomes clear Arthur and Sophie were never together. Their entire relationship was just a product of his imagination. The next day, Arthur visits his mother. While smoking with his left hand, he tells her that his laughter isn't a disorder, it's a part of who he is. Then he adds that he used to think his life was a tragedy, but now he realizes it's a comedy. And with that, he smothers her. At this point, something inside Arthur has changed forever. That part of him that had been trying to break free, his shadow, his rage, his frustration, his aggression, has finally taken control. It's the only part of himself that has ever made him feel seen. And now that shadow has a name: Joker. In reality, the entire story has been about how Arthur's shadow grows and grows until it fully consumes him. That's why I've been highlighting his body language throughout the story, because it's through those details that we can distinguish between Arthur and his shadow. Arthur is right-handed. Joker is left-handed. Arthur is shy and insecure. Joker is confident and bold. Arthur's body is tense, hunched, nervous. Joker moves with ease, fluidity, and power. Arthur tries to be good. Joker has no moral code. Also, Arthur said that his life isn't a tragedy, it's a comedy. And in a way, he's right. Pascal once said that nothing is more laughable than the stark contrast between what we expect and what actually happens. Comedy often shines a light on the absurdity of life, and Arthur's life is exactly that, absurd. It's absurd that a child who was abused and mistreated yet still tried to be good never received support or compassion, only rejection and humiliation. It's absurd that someone who has suffered so much continues to face hardship after hardship. But that's exactly what happens to him. His life is a cruel comedy, a reflection of a society that expects him to function while putting up every obstacle in his way, a world that tells people like him to just move on while denying them the tools they need to do so. Later, Arthur prepares for his appearance on the Murray Franklin show. He dyes his hair green and begins applying makeup, but the doorbell interrupts him. It's his former co-workers Gary and Randall who stop by after hearing about Penny's death. But Randall only cares because the police have been questioning the clowns, and Arthur still has his gun. Fed up with his hypocrisy, Arthur stabs him. Gary panics, but Arthur lets him go unharmed because Gary was the only one who ever treated him kindly. This moment reinforces the idea that what happened to Arthur wasn't inevitable. His fate wasn't set in stone. His transformation and the acts he commits could have been avoided if he had received more understanding, more support, more compassion. If the world he lived in had been just a little kinder to him, maybe things would have turned out differently. Access to quality mental health care, community support, and above all, basic human decency and respect can make a world of difference in someone's life. Arthur spared Gary's life because he was the only one who never made him feel like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. And deep down, that's what Arthur longed for the most: to be seen, accepted, and treated with dignity. Arthur puts on his new suit and dances his way to the show, but the police begin chasing him. Trying to escape, he enters the subway, which is full of people wearing clown masks on their way to the protests. This confuses the officers and allows Arthur to slip away unnoticed. Moments later, he arrives at the studio. While waiting in the dressing room, Murray Franklin stops by and asks him not to make any political statements or stir up controversy. Arthur tells him not to worry and requests to be introduced as Joker, the same name Franklin used to mock him on his show. Soon after, he's called on stage and walks out dancing. He tries to tell a joke about death, but the audience just laughs at him. Then he admits to being the subway killer and launches into a speech about how the system fails ordinary people. He points out how outraged people are over the deaths of the Wayne employees, while if someone like him were to die, no one would care. He says society is cruel and that people have lost all empathy. Then he tells Franklin that he's no different, that he only invited him on the show to make fun of him. He points the gun at Murray and delivers his punchline. What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash? You get what you fucking deserve. With that joke, Joker shoots Franklin in the head. The entire city watches the broadcast and protests erupt everywhere. Arthur is arrested, but while being transported, a protester-driven ambulance crashes into the police car, knocking him unconscious. The rioters pull him out and lay him on the hood. Arthur wakes up surrounded by cheering protesters. He responds by dancing. Meanwhile, the Waynes leave a theater only to be followed by a masked protester who shoots Thomas and his wife, sparing only little Bruce. Eventually, Arthur is admitted to Arkham Hospital. The second part begins with an animated sequence titled Me and My Shadow. Joker steps out of a car and is adored by everyone. His shadow detaches from him and the two begin to fight. In the dressing room, the shadow locks Arthur in a closet and goes on stage in his place. Arthur breaks free and joins the shadow on stage. He tries to sing, but the shadow stops him. Eventually, the two merge again, just as the police arrive and beat him. As I suggested before, the entire first film showed how Joker's shadow grew stronger with every tragedy until it became too powerful for Arthur to control. In the end, it consumed him completely. That interpretation is reinforced by the animation we just saw, which also includes the song We Three, My Echo, My Shadow, and Me, a perfect metaphor for Arthur's fractured psyche. The animation illustrated the conflict between Arthur and his shadow. We saw how the shadow locked him away and took over, but then Arthur broke free and tried to take the stage again. This sets up the core conflict of this story. Who is Arthur really? Is he Joker, the shadow that haunts him, the dark figure that others now idolize and fear? Or is he still Arthur Fleck, a forgotten man lost in the cracks of an increasingly cold and indifferent world? That is the central question of the second act. Arthur is no longer just fighting against the world. He's now fighting the image that world has created of him. At Arkham Asylum, guards escort Arthur from his cell to meet with his lawyer. Twice along the way, they ask if he has a new joke for them. It's been a while since his last. Arthur says nothing. As he walks, he hears a group singing and sees Harley. She looks at him, steps out, and makes a finger gun gesture, captivating Arthur. His lawyer informs him he's scheduled to meet with Dr. Beatty for an interview which will be recorded for use in his upcoming hearing. The defense is trying to get him transferred to a medical hospital instead of remaining in this correctional facility where violent guards run the place. Dr. Beatty believes that everything Arthur went through as a child caused a kind of internal split, a fragmentation meant to help him cope with pain. She suspects that another personality lives inside Arthur and that it was this alter ego who committed the crimes. During the interview, Arthur asks for a cigarette and smokes with his right hand. When Dr. Beatty brings up the three men who harassed him, the ones he killed in the subway, she asks whether the incident triggered any traumatic memories from his childhood or if he blacked out or saw bright lights. Arthur silently shakes his head. Then she asks if this other part of him, Joker, emerged when his mother died. Arthur's legal team tries to argue that he suffers from dissociative identity disorder, DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. To assess that claim, let's first understand what DID actually is. DID is characterized by the presence of two or more distinct identities or personality states that take control of a person's behavior at different times. It's typically associated with severe childhood trauma. When a child is subjected to extreme abuse or neglect and has no way to escape, the mind can dissociate as a survival mechanism. In the early stages of development, the sense of self isn't fully integrated, so the mind can fragment into alters that help cope with emotions, memories, and traumatic situations too overwhelming to handle otherwise. It's true that Arthur experienced severe trauma and abuse as a child, and ever since the first film, we've seen moments where his attitude and body language shift dramatically. However, I don't believe this means he has DID, and here's why. In DID, the identities are well defined, each with its own name, personality, behavior, and sometimes even way of speaking. Transitions between alters are typically abrupt and not under the person's control, often accompanied by memory loss, called dissociative amnesia, about what one alter did while another was in control. Arthur doesn't fit this description. We've never seen him switch abruptly between identities, speak as if he were someone else, or have memory gaps about his actions. While his attitude and demeanor sometimes change, what we're seeing isn't the emergence of a separate identity. It's what I've previously suggested, a possession by his shadow. This wasn't a fragmentation of identity, but a breaking point. The violence and hostility of the world around him unleashed all the anger and aggression he had bottled up inside, giving him a new sense of confidence, one that's still awkward and uneasy. His transformation isn't that of someone with multiple personalities, but of someone who, after years of repression, finally lets his impulses run wild. The shadow is just one part of a person, not the whole. When someone fully identifies with their shadow, it can lead to a kind of possession by their repressed unconscious self. That can result in loss of control, destruction, and the absence of morality, all of which we saw in Arthur by the end of the first film. However, in this sequel, we see that Arthur hasn't completely fused with that dark side. He's behaved well in prison, suggesting he's reverted to the quiet man he was before everything fell apart. The problem is that his shadow, Joker, has captivated not only the entire city, but also the audience watching the movie. He has become an icon, and now everyone expects Arthur to be that Joker. The question is, does Arthur really want to be him? A young inmate named Ricky approaches Arthur and says, "Hey, Arthur, the guards told me you wanted to teach me how to kiss. They say Joker's a great kisser." Arthur stands up and gives him a kiss. One of the guards then jokes that ever since they made a movie about him, everyone sees him as a star. Back in his cell, Arthur is seen smoking again with his right hand. We've seen how the guards ask him to do things Joker would do, like tell jokes, and now a rumor is going around that Joker's a great kisser. Everyone all the time keeps reminding Arthur how incredible Joker is. No one sees Arthur, they only see the image that's been projected onto him. This is important to highlight because while these may seem like small details, they're actually micro-reinforcements that keep pushing Arthur toward that identity. As we know, Arthur is someone desperate for love and connection, and comments like these can lead him in his deep need for acceptance to become what everyone expects of him. The next day, Arthur is taken to the choir group. It's part of the non-dangerous ward, but they allow Arthur to join because he's been a model inmate with no incidents. The instructor says, "We use music in this class to complete ourselves, to balance the forces that clash and the fractures within us." I really like that line. It says a lot. The idea of completing ourselves suggests that we're not just what we show on the surface, but a combination of all our parts, including those we prefer to hide. Music, being a form of artistic expression, allows those hidden, uncontrollable, or difficult to express parts to come to light in a symbolic and more manageable way. And through that process, a balance is created between the internal forces in conflict, promoting integration rather than repression. From this perspective, the songs Arthur will imagine himself singing reflect his inner world. Through them, he can process his emotions, conflicts, and contradictions and begin to find a way to balance his inner fractures. There, he meets Lee, who tells him she set her parents' apartment on fire. Arthur confesses that he actually killed 6 people. He also killed his mother, though no one knows. She reveals herself to be a fan of his and says she's seen the Joker movie around 20 times. She tells him she grew up in the same neighborhood as him, used the same stairs to go to school every day. She says her parents didn't care about her either, and her father used to beat her badly. Then Harley says, "If only those friends could see me now." She adds that the first time she saw Joker on the Murray Franklin show, she hoped he'd blow his brains out. And when he did, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. Arthur smiles, then tells a joke to guard Jackie, who laughs and offers him a cigarette, saying, "You just needed to go a little old school." Arthur thanks him with a pat on the back, but the guard punches him for touching him. What's important to note here is that Harley didn't admire Arthur. She admired Joker. That explains why, after this interaction, Arthur finally tells a joke to a guard after so much time. It's Joker who gets admiration from someone Arthur desires, and since what Harley wants is Joker, Arthur starts to become that image. Young Assistant District Attorney Harvey appears on the news. The judge has ruled that Arthur is fit to stand trial. Dent says pleading insanity makes no sense. Arthur is a monster who knew exactly what he was doing, and the prosecution will seek the death penalty. Upon hearing this, Arthur imagines himself singing "For Once in My Life" by Stevie Wonder, reflecting that for the first time someone needs him and that he too has longed for that. Back in reality, he walks out smoking with his right hand. Here I'd like to pause to point something out. We just saw Harvey Dent, who in the Batman universe later becomes the district attorney and eventually the villain Two-Face, but if we connect some dots, we might notice something that doesn't align with conventional Joker lore. In most versions, Joker's existence is a consequence of Batman's presence. However, we saw in the first movie that Bruce Wayne is still a child, and now we're being shown that Harvey Dent is still a young assistant DA. That contrasts with most stories where Dent is already the district attorney when Joker emerges. Perhaps this is a clue. Could it be that Arthur was never really the Joker we all believed he was, both in his world and in ours? After a call with his lawyer, a guard approaches Arthur and asks him to sign a book, whispering to another guard that it'll be worth a fortune once they fry his ass. Arthur overhears and signs it with a message, "Hope you get cancer." That night, he goes to the movies and sits next to Lee. Lee wants to leave, but Arthur doesn't want to disobey. So Lee sets the theater on fire, and while everyone else flees, she and Arthur walk out laughing. Amid the chaos, paparazzi catch them together for the first time. Lee sings "If My Friends Could See Me Now" from the musical Sweet Charity. The very first thing Harley said when she met Arthur was, "If only my friends could see me now." From that moment, we could already sense her true intentions, and now with the song she just sang in front of the paparazzi, there's no doubt. For her, it's not about Arthur. It's about how others see her. She only wants attention. She's a Joker fangirl, and now that he's become a celebrity, she believes being by his side will give her the fame she craves. Arthur is punished with 2 weeks in solitary confinement. Suddenly, while Arthur is asleep, Lee wakes him up. She says a guard let her in, but they don't have much time. She tells him they're sending her home because they think he's a bad influence on her. Lee says that's a good thing because now she can attend his trial every day until he's free, and that together they'll build a mountain. Arthur tries to kiss her, but she stops him. She pulls out makeup and says she wants to see the real Arthur. She paints his face like Joker's, and then they kiss. She tells him he should stop taking his meds, and he responds that he already has. Then they become intimate. This was a pivotal moment. Harley insisted that the real Arthur is Joker, and only got physically close to him after transforming him into the clown. We already know Harley doesn't care much about Arthur, but here's the key. By receiving intimacy through Joker's image, Arthur's desire to fully embrace that identity is reinforced. Later, an interviewer arrives to speak with Arthur. His lawyer mentions they might ask about Lee since she's been doing a lot of press about their relationship. Arthur says he loves Lee because she understands him. Before the interview, the lawyer tells him this is his chance to show a different side, so the public can see who he really is. She says people need to understand he was sick, delusional. She tells him, "You're not Joker, you're Arthur Fleck." Arthur, a bit nervous, smokes with his left hand and suddenly kisses the lawyer, who is left speechless. Arthur enters with the interviewer, Patty, who asks whether he'd prefer to be called Joker or Arthur. The lawyer steps in and clarifies that they've agreed not to call him Joker, but Arthur Fleck. Patty asks about the murder of Franklin. Arthur says he was going through a lot at the time, that he doesn't really remember what happened that night. He mentions having a blackout and seeing bright lights. He was having trouble distinguishing between what was real and what wasn't. He says the only thing he remembers from that night is that he was planning to hurt himself on national television. When Patty asks if he still wants to die, Arthur insists that he's no longer that person. Patty interrupts him and says, "That wasn't really you." Arthur replies that that's not what he meant, but Patty cuts him off and keeps going. He says he now understands that Arthur's defense is that Joker did it, that he's going to plead insanity. Arthur tries to clarify that he doesn't know anything about that defense, but Patty ignores him and asks who he's speaking with now, the poor, naive Arthur Fleck or the Joker. Arthur, annoyed, responds that Patty is just like Murray, like everyone else. All he wants is sensationalism. He's only interested in talking about his past mistakes, not about who he is now. He doesn't care about the changes he's made, and that's what they should be talking about. Patty then asks him what's changed, and Arthur says, "I'm not alone anymore." Arthur begins to sing Bewitched, expressing how enchanted he is with Harley. Before the interview, we saw Arthur increasingly stepping into the Joker identity. After Harley reinforced that side of him following their moment of intimacy, Arthur smoked with his left hand, impulsively kissed the lawyer, and during the interview, he claimed not to have been fully aware of his actions. He repeated almost word for word what his lawyer and the doctor had said earlier when suggesting he might have DID, that he blacked out, saw bright lights, and couldn't tell what was real. But we know that's not true. At first, he himself denied all of that. Arthur is trying to become the Joker everyone expects him to be. Later, Arthur is taken to his hearing, and outside, Joker fans are protesting for his release. Just before entering the courtroom, he lights a cigarette with his right hand. When he enters, the crowd in the courtroom welcomes him with applause. Arthur only looks for one person, Lee. She's outside smoking and then enters. Arthur lights up with emotion. A doctor is called to testify. He says there is no evidence that Arthur has dissociative identity disorder or that he acted as Joker in a dissociated state. According to him, Arthur is not psychotic and is fully capable of telling reality from fantasy. He believes Arthur was of sound mind when he committed the crimes and in fact suspects he's faking mental illness. He concludes he's a very disturbed person, but I cannot give him a psychiatric defense. The lawyer cross-examines the doctor and reveals that he only interviewed Arthur for 89 minutes. He also didn't know that when Arthur was 7, social services didn't believe his abuse reports and returned him to his mother's home where his abuser was. She points out that the doctor can't definitively prove that someone like Arthur didn't have to retreat into fantasy and create another identity to survive when he was a terrified 7-year-old boy. And that identity may have re-emerged when he was attacked on the subway by 3 harassers. Next, Miss Kane, a social worker, reads from Arthur's journal and mentions that from her perspective, it wasn't written by a different personality. It sounds like Arthur. She says he always wrote about his fantasies, the women he imagined being with, like Sophie, and his unfunny jokes. This supports what I previously mentioned. The journal showed consistent behavior from Arthur. There are no signs of a separate identity taking control. What we've seen is a psychological evolution deeply shaped by his environment and deteriorating mental health, not a disassociated identity split. At the end of the hearing, Harley confronts the lawyer in front of reporters and tells her the crowd outside came to see Joker, not Arthur Fleck, and that she's making him look ridiculous. She warns that if she keeps this up, he'll never go free. This is the trial of the century, she says, and you still don't understand your own client. She insists Joker isn't sick, he's perfect. The lawyer speaks privately with Arthur and warns him about Harley, saying they could win the case, but Harley might ruin everything. Arthur defends Harley, saying she understands him because they've been through the same things. Her mother was cruel to her and she lost her father. The lawyer reveals that Harley didn't grow up in the same neighborhood, that she lives with her parents, and her father isn't dead, he's a doctor. She checked herself into the hospital voluntarily and left when she wanted. She even studied psychiatry. The lawyer warns Arthur that Harley is manipulating him and urges him not to trust her. In an imaginary musical sequence, Joker and Harley become co-hosts of a classic variety show. They open the show with a duet of To Love Somebody by the Bee Gees. Suddenly, Lee drifts away from Arthur, turns to the audience, and begins singing for them. Arthur, upset, tells her she's leaving him out and making everything about herself. He also points out that the song is about you loving me, to which she replies that yes, the song is about mutual love, but they're performing for the audience, and they have to give people what they want to see. The fantasy ends abruptly when Harley shoots Joker in the stomach, reflecting the betrayal Arthur feels deep down. Arthur sits with Ricky on a bench reserved for guards. He pretends to shoot at other inmates with his hand and smokes with his left hand. The guards angrily approach, but Ricky steps in to defend him, surprising the guard who didn't expect him to stand up. Arthur receives a visit from Harley, who admits she lied about her life to impress him. She confesses she checked herself into the correctional facility just to meet him. He replies she could have just written him a letter, to which he says she wouldn't have known what to write. She's nobody compared to him. Arthur tells her his lawyer warned him about her, but Harley insists the lawyer is only trying to turn him against her. She claims the lawyer doesn't care about him, but she does. She also tells him she moved into Arthur's old apartment building to have a home ready for them once he gets out. But Arthur says he wouldn't want to live there. Then Harley reveals she's pregnant and starts singing They Long to Be Close to You by the Carpenters. Arthur joins in and Harley draws a smile on the glass with her lipstick. He smiles. Later, he's seen dancing and smoking with his left hand in his cell. Harley continues to exert a powerful influence over Arthur to embrace his identity as Joker. She reveals everything she's done for him, makes him feel special, important, and assures him that she's the only one who truly cares. And to seal her hold on him, she tells him she's pregnant with his child. Everything Arthur ever wanted in life, and maybe more than he ever dreamed of. A family. His chance to belong somewhere. But to have it, he has to become Joker. On another day of the trial, Sophie is called to the stand. She explains she hadn't responded to previous subpoenas because after Arthur's movie, his fans began to harass her and blame her for what happened. Fearing for her safety and that of her daughter, she left the city. Sophie recalls that Arthur's mother once told her there was something strange about him, that he lived in a fantasy world and had a peculiar laugh she called a silly smile. She also mentions that when Arthur was a child, his mother made up a story so he wouldn't hurt himself. She told him he was put on this earth to bring joy, which is why she called him Happy. His mother thought it was absurd that Arthur had based his entire life on that made-up story. Sophie says she thought it was ridiculous to believe he could make people laugh. She never considered him funny. Arthur is visibly shaken by what he hears and imagines himself singing the Joker while smoking with his left hand. In his mind, he murders Harvey Dent and Judge Herman as Harley dances on the prosecutor's table. Arthur interrupts the hearing, fires his lawyer, and the crowd applauds. Harley visits him in his cell, congratulates him, and tells him the people are crazy about him. That now he can do whatever he wants, because he is the Joker. Arthur smokes with his left hand. This was another breaking point for Arthur, much like the one he experienced in the first film when he discovered he was adopted and that his mother had been complicit in his abuse. Once again, a painful truth related to his mother completely shattered him. Before he realized that his identity and life story were a lie and that the woman he trusted and thought loved him had actually hurt him, now he discovers that his purpose, the one thing that gave meaning to his life, was just another lie. A story his mother made up just to stop him from hurting himself. She never believed in him. She never thought he could make people laugh. And now she even mocked the fact that he had built his entire life around those words she told him as a child. That disappointment broke him just as deeply as the last one did, and just like back then, his shadow took over. And the world celebrates it, because now they're finally seeing the Joker they always wanted. In an interview, the lawyer says this is all a tragedy. She explains that Arthur believes he has the support of many, but in reality, they care about the Joker and not him. When Arthur returns to the correctional facility, the inmates cheer for him, especially Ricky. Arthur climbs up on a table, causing a commotion the guards try to control. The next day, Arthur represents himself. He shows up at court dressed and made up as the Joker. They call Gary, a former co-worker of Arthur's who witnessed Arthur stabbing Randall, another co-worker who was a bully, but who, according to Gary, didn't deserve to die. Arthur questions Gary, trying to make a joke about his last name, then asks if when he saw him kill Randall, he thought he was a different person, or if he had always been the Joker. Gary says he had never seen that side of him before, and Arthur replies maybe that's because no one had ever really been looking. Arthur tells Gary he's just like everyone else who underestimated him, from Murray Franklin to the guards at Arkham who think they can treat treat him like garbage. But he won't let anyone treat him like that anymore, because now he feels free. Gary cries and asks Arthur why he did this to him. Arthur is confused. He lied to Gary and he didn't hurt him. Gary responds, "That's what you think." He says he hasn't been able to go back to work, can't sleep, and is constantly afraid. That day made him feel small. It reminded him of how helpless he is. He tells Arthur he was the only one at work who never made fun of him, who was kind to him. The session ends, Arthur looks at Harley, and they walk out together. In his mind, he imagines them singing "Gonna Build a Mountain" on stage. During the fantasy, Arthur smokes with his left hand. Back at Arkham, the guards, angry about what he said in court, abuse him. When they take him back to his cell, the other inmates see what happened and start rioting. Ricky sings a menacing version of "The Saints Are Coming." They pull him from his cell and beat him viciously, killing him. Arthur is left lying there in silence, stunned. The final day of the trial arrives. Arthur, dressed as the Joker, smokes with his left hand. He says he had planned to come out as Joker and deliver a speech full of rage, blaming everyone for his miserable life, but that he can't keep doing that. He says it was all a fantasy. There is no Joker, only him. He admits to killing 6 people and his mother and says he wishes he hadn't, but he did. He just wants to start over. At that moment, Harley and other disappointed admirers stand up and leave the courtroom. The jury finds him guilty. Arthur starts laughing uncontrollably due to his condition. Someone in the audience, angered by the laughter, lunges at him. Chaos erupts, and amidst the madness, a car bomb explodes. When the guards killed Ricky, Arthur realized that becoming the Joker didn't change anything. The corruption is still there. The system remains the same. He understood that everything is so rotten, it's never going to change. It was at that moment that he decided to let go of the Joker persona. Deep down, Arthur Fleck had always just been himself. He was never the figure Gotham forced upon him, nor the icon the people turned him into. For the first time, he openly admitted that he was the one who committed the murders and that he regretted them. He had accepted what he had done. He had accepted his shadow, but he refused to let it define him. He no longer wanted to live a lie. He just wanted to be who he truly was. Arthur leaves the building. A fan recognizes him and offers him a ride. At one point, Arthur jumps out and runs away. His fans shout after him, calling him Joker, saying they love him. Arthur finds Harley waiting for him on the stairs. Her hair is cut short. He tells her he escaped, that now they can finally leave together, but Harley says that's not going to happen. What they had was just a fantasy, and he gave up. Arthur insists he's still the same man she fell in love with, the same one who killed Murray, but she replies that he isn't, that the Joker is gone, because he himself said so. Arthur tells her he can't live without her, that they're going to have a baby. She begins to sing. Arthur begs her to stop, that he doesn't want to sing anymore. He just wants to talk, but she says goodbye and walks away. At the beginning, the music teacher said that music was used to make us whole, to bring balance to the internal conflicts and mend the fractures within. And through his journey, Arthur finally reached a conclusion about who he truly is. He is no longer split. There's no longer an internal struggle. He has found himself and accepted who he truly is, Arthur Fleck. That's why he doesn't need to sing anymore. The police arrive and arrest Arthur, taking him back to Arkham. They tell him he has a visitor. On his way, a fellow inmate stops him and says, "Hey, I've got a joke for you." He tells him the punchline and then stabs Arthur. As Arthur dies, the inmate laughs. Throughout this second film, we've seen how everyone used Arthur. The guards turned him into their entertainment. The protesters made him a symbol to push their own agendas. Harley used him to gain fame. And the moment he stopped being what they wanted him to be, they all abandoned him. In fact, Harley never called him Arthur the entire movie, until the moment she left him behind on the stairs. And that's exactly what we, the viewers, did in real life. The sad truth is that Arthur was always Arthur, not the Joker from Batman that many expected to see, and in the end, none of us cared about Arthur. Harley, Ricky, and the fans in the movie represent us, the audience that wanted to see Arthur Fleck become the Joker, the agent of chaos who would face off against Batman. But in truth, we never saw beyond what we wanted to see. Arthur was never a calculating villain or a manipulative mastermind. He was never a chaotic anarchist who committed evil just for fun. Arthur was a nobody, a broken, lonely man suffering from severe mental illness, abused since childhood, repeatedly failed by the system, and when he finally reacted, he did so in the only way he knew how. Maybe not the best way, but Arthur wasn't enough. He wasn't the Joker we wanted. And just like Harley, and like the people in the courtroom who stood up and walked out, we too abandoned Arthur the moment he said there was no Joker, just Arthur. It's almost as if the filmmakers predicted this exact reaction. It's curious how, at one point, a guard told Arthur that ever since the Joker movie came out, everyone sees him as a star. Then Harley said she's watched it over and over, just like so many people did in real life. Whether we like this sequel or not, because my intention isn't to critique it in that sense, the film is a critique in itself. A critique of how the first movie, by becoming a box office success, glorified the Joker's violence so much that we idolized the character and forgot about Arthur Fleck, the broken man behind the mask. And in the end, Arthur was murdered by someone who was willing to become the Joker everyone expected. Because when a broken society glorifies and romanticizes violence, when it turns tragic figures into dangerous icons, all it achieves is creating more people who want to play that part without anything in the system ever changing, perpetuating a cycle of violence that never ends.